The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink as Marcus walked home from his part-time job at the local grocery store. It was a typical evening in Maplewood, a small town where everyone seemed to know each other. Or so it felt. The air was cool and the streets were quiet except for the occasional hum of cars passing by. Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack on his shoulder and turned up the volume on his headphones. He liked listening to music while walking. It helped him relax after a long day of work and school. Marcus was only 16, but life hadn't been easy for him. Growing up black in a predominantly white neighborhood meant he often faced stares and whispers he didn't understand. People sometimes crossed the street when they saw him coming or clutched their bags tighter as if he might do something wrong. He tried not to let it bother him too much. He told himself that people would see who he really was once they got to know him, but deep down it hurt. Tonight, though, Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. He was focused on getting home so he could finish his homework and maybe grab a snack before bed. His shift at the grocery store had been busy, and he was tired. As he turned onto his street, he noticed 2 police cars parked near the corner. Their flashing red and blue lights lit up the otherwise calm evening. At first, Marcus didn't think much of it. Maybe there had been an accident or some kind of disturbance nearby. But then he saw the officers step out of their vehicles and start walking toward him. 4 of them, all dressed in uniform, their faces serious. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. What did they want? One of the officers approached him, his hand resting casually on the holster of his gun. "Hey, kid," he said gruffly. "Where are you coming from?" Marcus pulled one earbud out and stopped walking. "I'm just heading home," he replied, trying to sound calm even though his stomach was twisting into knots. "Home, huh?" the officer asked, raising an eyebrow. "What's your name?" "Marcus," he answered quickly. "Marcus Thompson." The officer exchanged glances with his partner before continuing. "You live around here?" "Yes, sir. Just down the block." The officer nodded slowly, but instead of letting Marcus go, he stepped closer. "Mind telling me why you look so suspicious?" Marcus blinked, taken aback by the question. Suspicious? What did that even mean? "I don't know what you mean," he said carefully. "I'm just walking home from work." The officer didn't seem satisfied. "Empty your pockets," he ordered, gesturing impatiently. Marcus hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. Was this really happening? All he'd done was walk home after a shift at the store. Still, he knew better than to argue. Slowly, he reached into his pockets and pulled out a few coins, his house keys and a crumpled receipt from the grocery store. He held them out for the officer to see. "Anything else?" The officer pressed, his tone sharp. "No, sir," Marcus replied, shaking his head. But the questioning didn't stop there. Another officer stepped forward, pointing a finger at Marcus. "You match the description of someone who vandalized the park earlier today," he said accusingly. "Know anything about that?" Marcus felt a surge of frustration rise in his chest. "No, I don't," he exclaimed. "I've been working all afternoon. You can check my schedule if you don't believe me." The officers ignored his protests. One of them demanded to see ID, while another muttered under his breath about how kids like Marcus always cause trouble. Marcus clenched his fists, biting back the angry words threatening to spill out. He wanted to scream, to tell them how unfair this was, but he knew it wouldn't help. Instead, he stood silently, feeling smaller and smaller with each passing second. As the tension grew thicker, none of them noticed the sleek black SUV pulling up to the scene. Its tires screeched slightly as it came to a halt behind the patrol cars. The driver's door opened, and out stepped a tall man dressed in full military uniform. His presence commanded immediate attention. Everyone turned to look, including Marcus, whose eyes widened in shock. It was Colonel David Thompson, Marcus's father. Dressed in impeccably pressed dress blues adorned with medals and insignias, Colonel Thompson radiated authority. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in the nervous expressions of the officers and the defensive posture of his son. Without hesitation, he strode toward the group, his boots clicking against the pavement. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his voice firm and unwavering. The officers straightened up instantly, their earlier confidence replaced by unease. One of them stammered an explanation, trying to justify their actions by repeating vague claims about vandalism and suspicious behavior, but Colonel Thompson wasn't buying it. "That's my son you're harassing," he said sharply, cutting the officer off mid-sentence. "And unless you have concrete evidence tying him to a crime, I suggest you let him go right now." Marcus watched in awe as his father took control of the situation. He'd always admired his dad for his strength and leadership, but seeing him stand up to these officers in such a commanding way made him feel proud and safe for the first time that evening. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly realizing they had made a mistake. One of them muttered an apology and began backing away, while another fumbled with his radio. Within minutes, the tension dissolved, and the patrol cars drove off, leaving Marcus and his father alone on the street. As they stood there in the fading light, Marcus finally allowed himself to breathe again. For the first time since the ordeal began, he felt like he could relax. But he also knew that this wasn't over, not really. Something inside him had shifted during those tense moments, and he couldn't shake the feeling that things would never be quite the same again. Colonel David Thompson stood tall, his military uniform gleaming under the dim streetlights. His presence alone was enough to silence the chaos that had unfolded just moments ago. The officers who had been aggressively questioning Marcus now looked uneasy, their earlier confidence crumbling in the face of authority they couldn't ignore. One of them tried to explain themselves again, but Colonel Thompson raised a hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. "Enough," he said firmly, his voice carrying both strength and precision. "I asked you what's going on here, and I expect a clear answer, not excuses." The officer swallowed hard, clearly intimidated. "Sir, we were investigating reports of vandalism at the park earlier today. This young man matched the description of the suspect, so we stopped him for questioning." Colonel Thompson's eyes narrowed as he studied the officer carefully. "What description?" he asked sharply. "Be specific." The officer hesitated, glancing at his colleagues before replying. A black male teenager wearing dark clothing and carrying a backpack." Marcus flinched at the vague description. It could apply to practically anyone in the neighborhood, including half the kids at his school. He clenched his fists, trying to stay calm, but anger bubbled beneath the surface. Colonel Thompson didn't miss a beat. "So you're telling me," he said slowly, emphasizing each word, "that my son, a teenager walking home from his job at the grocery store, was detained because he fits a generic profile? That's unacceptable." The officers shifted uncomfortably, aware that they were losing ground. One of them attempted to defend their actions by pointing out that Marcus hadn't immediately shown ID when asked. But Colonel Thompson wasn't having it. And why should he have to prove himself guilty before being proven innocent? He countered. "This isn't about procedure. It's about accountability. You can't treat people like criminals simply because of how they look." His words hung heavy in the air, leaving no room for argument. The officers exchanged nervous glances, realizing they had crossed a line. They knew better than to challenge someone of Colonel Thompson's rank and reputation. Finally, one of them stepped forward, offering a weak apology. "We're sorry if there was any misunderstanding, sir. We'll make sure this doesn't happen again." Colonel Thompson nodded stiffly, though his expression remained stern. "You'd better," he said, "because I'll be filing a formal complaint with your department tomorrow morning, and I expect a full review of this incident." With that, the officers retreated to their patrol cars, eager to put distance between themselves and the imposing figure in front of them. As the flashing lights faded into the distance, Marcus finally exhaled the breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. A father's strength. Once the police cars were gone, Colonel Thompson turned to Marcus, his demeanor softening slightly. "Are you okay, son?" he asked, placing a reassuring hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus nodded, though his hands were still trembling. "Yeah, I think so. Thanks, Dad. If you hadn't shown up..." His voice trailed off, unable to finish the thought. What would have happened if his father hadn't arrived? Would the officers have let him go eventually, or would things have escalated further? The uncertainty weighed heavily on him. Colonel Thompson gave his son a firm pat on the back. "Don't worry about that now. What matters is that you're safe. Let's get you home." They walked together toward their house, the quiet evening air providing little comfort after the ordeal Marcus had endured. As they reached the porch, Colonel Thompson paused and turned to face his son. "Listen to me, Marcus," he said seriously. "What those officers did tonight was wrong, and I won't stand for it. But remember this: you didn't do anything to deserve that treatment. Don't let anyone ever make you feel like you're less than who you are." Marcus nodded again, feeling a mix of emotions. He appreciated his father's support, but part of him wondered if standing up to the police like this would come back to haunt them. Would the officers retaliate somehow? Would the community side with law enforcement over a teenage boy and his father? For now, though, all Marcus wanted was to forget about the night's events and focus on something normal, like finishing his homework or watching a movie with his dad. Facing the neighborhood, word of the incident spread quickly through Maplewood. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know about the confrontation between Colonel Thompson and the police officers. Some neighbors whispered sympathetically about Marcus, while others dismissed the event as standard procedure. At school, Marcus found himself at the center of attention. Classmates approached him during lunch asking questions about what had happened. Some praised him for standing his ground, while others warned him to tread carefully. "You're lucky your dad showed up," one friend said cautiously. "But not everyone has someone like him looking out for them. Be careful, okay?" Marcus nodded, understanding the underlying message, while his father's intervention had saved him last night. It also highlighted the harsh reality that many others weren't as fortunate. Later that afternoon, Marcus returned home to find his father sitting at the kitchen table, reviewing documents. On his laptop, Colonel Thompson glanced up as Marcus entered the room. "How was school?" he asked casually. "Fine," Marcus replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. Colonel Thompson set aside his laptop and gestured for Marcus to sit down. "Something on your mind?" Marcus hesitated, unsure how to express what he was feeling. Finally, he blurted out, "Do you think they'll actually listen to your complaint? Or will they just brush it off?" His father sighed, leaning back in his chair. "To be honest, I don't know," he admitted. "There's always resistance when you try to hold people accountable. But staying silent isn't an option either. We have to keep pushing for change, even if it's slow." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. He admired his father's determination, but the weight of the situation still felt overwhelming. A ripple effect. Over the following days, the story gained traction beyond Maplewood. Local news outlets picked up on the incident, framing it as a case of alleged racial profiling. Headlines like, "Military officer confronts police over son's detention," began circulating online, sparking debates across social media platforms. Some praised Colonel Thompson for taking a stand against injustice, calling him a hero. Others criticized him, accusing him of undermining law enforcement and creating division within the community. Opinions were divided, and tensions ran high. Despite the backlash, Colonel Thompson remained steadfast. He appeared on local TV shows and radio interviews, sharing his perspective and urging reforms in policing practices. Each time he emphasized the importance of treating everyone, regardless of race or background, with dignity and respect. Marcus watched his father navigate the spotlight with a mixture of pride and concern. On one hand, he was grateful for his dad's unwavering commitment to justice. On the other hand, he worried about the toll it might take on their family. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Marcus turned to his father and said, "Dad, I'm proud of you for doing this, but sometimes I wonder, is it worth it? All the negativity and criticism, it seems like it never ends." Colonel Thompson smiled faintly, gazing at the horizon. "It's not easy, Marcus, change rarely is, but every step we take brings us closer to a better future. Not just for us, but for everyone who comes after us. That's why it's worth it." Marcus nodded silently, letting his father's words sink in. For the first time since the incident, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe things wouldn't change overnight, but with persistence and courage, perhaps they could build a world where no one else had to endure what he had gone through. And for now, that was enough. The days following the incident were anything but ordinary for Marcus and his family. What had started as a quiet evening walk home had turned into a whirlwind of media attention, public debate, and personal reflection. Colonel David Thompson's confrontation with the police officers became the talk of Maplewood, and soon, the entire nation. The story was everywhere, on local news channels, social media platforms, and even national headlines like "Military Officer Takes Stand Against" alleged racial profiling. For Marcus, life suddenly felt surreal. He went from being an average teenager just trying to get through high school to someone whose name everyone seemed to recognize. At first, he tried to ignore it, focusing instead on his daily routine, going to school, working his part-time job at the grocery store, and spending time with friends. But no matter how hard he tried to act normal, the weight of what had happened lingered in the background. Mixed reactions. Not everyone reacted to the story in the same way. In Maplewood, opinions were divided. Some neighbors expressed support for Marcus and his father, praising Colonel Thompson for standing up against injustice. "It's about time someone held those officers accountable," one elderly woman told Marcus when she saw him walking home from work. Others, however, weren't so kind. A few parents whispered behind closed doors, accusing Colonel Thompson of making the situation worse by confronting the police. "He should have let them do their job," one man muttered during a town hall meeting. "If kids don't cause trouble, they won't get stopped." At school, Marcus found himself navigating a minefield of mixed reactions. Some classmates patted him on the back, calling him brave for enduring such treatment. Others warned him to keep his head down. "You're lucky your dad saved you this time," one friend said cautiously. "But not everyone has backup like that. Watch out." Marcus appreciated the concern, but it only added to his frustration. Why did he need backup just to walk home without fear? Wasn't that something everyone deserved? Standing up against backlash, Colonel Thompson didn't shy away from the backlash. If anything, he embraced it, using the platform his military rank and reputation afforded him to advocate for change. He gave interviews to journalists, attended community meetings, and spoke openly about the need for reform within law enforcement practices. In one televised interview, he addressed the criticism head-on. "Some people have accused me of undermining police authority," he said calmly, sitting upright in his dress blues. "But this isn't about attacking law enforcement, it's about holding them accountable. Officers are supposed to protect and serve all citizens equally, regardless of race or background. When that trust is broken, we must speak up." His words resonated with many viewers, especially those who had experienced similar incidents themselves. Messages of support poured in from across the country, thanking Colonel Thompson for shining a light on systemic issues that often went unaddressed, but not everyone agreed. Critics argued that Colonel Thompson's actions painted police officers in a negative light and created unnecessary tension between civilians and law enforcement. Online forums buzzed with heated debates, some accusing him of playing the race card, while others defended his right to challenge unfair treatment. Despite the backlash, Colonel Thompson remained unfazed. He knew that advocating for justice came with risks, but he also believed it was worth it, for Marcus, for their community, and for future generations. A family under pressure. While Colonel Thompson faced scrutiny in the public eye, the stress of the situation weighed heavily on the entire family. Marcus's mother, Lisa, struggled to balance her emotions. On one hand, she was proud of her husband for taking a stand. On the other, she worried about the toll it might take on their lives. "What if this makes things worse?" she asked one night, pacing the living room after another long day of news coverage. "What if people start targeting us because of this?" Colonel Thompson placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "I won't lie, it's a risk," he admitted. but staying silent is riskier. We can't let fear stop us from doing what's right. Lisa sighed, knowing her husband was right but still unable to shake her concerns. Meanwhile, Marcus tried to stay strong for both of his parents, though he couldn't deny feeling anxious himself. Every time he left the house, he wondered if someone might recognize him and say something hurtful, or worse, retaliate against him for speaking out. To cope, Marcus threw himself into his studies and extracurricular activities. He joined the debate team at school, where he learned how to articulate his thoughts clearly and confidently. It was a skill that came in handy during classroom discussions about racial profiling and systemic inequality. Finding allies. Amid the chaos, Marcus discovered unexpected allies. One of his teachers, Mrs. Anderson, pulled him aside after class one day. "I know this hasn't been easy for you," she said gently, "but I want you to know that I'm here if you ever need to talk." Her kindness meant more to Marcus than she realized. For the first time since the incident, he felt like someone outside his family truly understood what he was going through. Other students began reaching out too. A group of seniors started organizing a community event called Unity Day, aimed at fostering dialogue between residents and law enforcement. They invited Marcus to speak at the event, hoping his story could inspire meaningful conversations. At first, Marcus hesitated. Public speaking wasn't his strong suit, and the thought of sharing his experience in front of strangers made him nervous. But after talking it over with his parents, he decided to give it a try. A turning point on the day of Unity Day. The town park was filled with people, families, students, local leaders, and even a few police officers. Tents were set up with informational booths, and a stage stood at the center of the gathering. As Marcus approached the microphone, his heart raced. He glanced at his father, who gave him an encouraging nod from the crowd. Taking a deep breath, Marcus began to speak. "Hi, everyone," he started, his voice trembling slightly. "My name is Marcus, and I'm here today because of something that happened to me last month." He recounted the events of that evening, the confrontation with the officers, his father's intervention, and the aftermath that followed. His words were simple but powerful, painting a vivid picture of what it felt like to be judged based on appearance rather than character. "When my dad showed up that night, I felt safe, for the first time in hours," Marcus continued. "But I realized something else too, that not everyone has someone like him looking out for them. And that's why we need to work together to create a world where everyone feels safe, no matter who they are." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet. Tears streamed down Mrs. Anderson's face as she watched Marcus finish his speech. Even some of the police officers present nodded respectfully, acknowledging the courage it took for him to share his story. Moving forward. After the event, Marcus felt a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in weeks. Speaking out hadn't erased the pain of what had happened, but it had given him a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that his voice mattered, and that by sharing his story, he could help spark change. That evening, as the family sat together at the dinner table, Colonel Thompson raised his glass in a toast. "To Marcus," he said proudly, "for finding your voice and using it to make a difference." Marcus smiled, feeling a warmth spread through his chest. For the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful, not just for himself, but for the future of his community. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they were ready to face it, together. The aftermath of Unity Day brought a mix of emotions for Marcus and his family. On one hand, the event had been a success. People from all walks of life came together to discuss issues like racial profiling, accountability in law enforcement, and how to build trust between communities and police. Marcus's speech had resonated deeply with many attendees, sparking conversations that continued long after the event ended. But on the other hand, the increased visibility also brought challenges. With more attention came more scrutiny, and not everyone was supportive of the changes Marcus and his father were advocating for. Public reaction deepens divides in the days following Unity Day. Opinions about Colonel Thompson and Marcus became even more polarized. Supporters praised them for their courage and leadership, calling them role models for standing up against injustice. Local activists invited Marcus to speak at rallies and community forums, while organizations offered to collaborate with Colonel Thompson on initiatives aimed at reforming policing practices, but alongside the praise came criticism, and sometimes outright hostility. Some residents accused Colonel Thompson of stirring up trouble and dividing the town. "Why does everything have to be about race?" one man shouted during a heated town hall meeting. "We're trying to move forward, but people like him keep dragging us backward." Others took their frustrations online, posting hateful comments under news articles and social media posts about Marcus and his father. Anonymous accounts called Marcus a liar, claiming he must have done something wrong to attract police attention in the first place. The negativity weighed heavily on Marcus, who struggled to focus on schoolwork and daily life amidst the constant barrage of attacks. One afternoon, as Marcus walked home from school, he noticed a group of older kids loitering near the park. They stared at him as he passed, whispering and laughing among themselves. One of them called out, "Hey, isn't that the kid whose dad thinks he's better than cops?" Marcus quickened his pace, his heart pounding. He wanted to ignore them, but the word stung. Was this what his life would be like now? Would every step outside his house feel like walking into a battlefield? A family united. At home, Marcus tried to hide his frustration from his parents, but they could see right through him. His mother, Lisa, often found him sitting alone, in his room, staring blankly at his phone or flipping through pages of a book without reading a single word. Concerned, she sat down with him one evening to talk. "Marcus," she began gently, "I know things haven't been easy lately, but you don't have to carry this burden alone. Your dad and I are here for you, no matter what." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. I don't understand why some people hate us so much. All we did was tell the truth. Why is that so hard for them to accept?" Lisa placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Sometimes people lash out because they're afraid of change," she explained. "What you and your dad are doing challenges the way things have always been. That scares some people even if they won't admit it." Her words helped Marcus feel a little less isolated, but the tension didn't disappear overnight. Colonel Thompson, too, felt the strain. Despite his years of experience leading soldiers and making tough decisions, navigating public backlash was new territory for him. He spent hours drafting statements, responding to emails, and preparing for interviews, all while balancing his responsibilities as a husband and father. One night, after a particularly grueling day, Colonel Thompson joined Marcus on the porch. The two sat in silence for a while, watching the stars twinkle above. Finally, Marcus broke the quiet. "Do you ever regret doing this, Dad?" he asked softly. "Standing up to those officers, I mean. Sometimes it feels like we're fighting a losing battle." Colonel Thompson chuckled dryly. "Regret? No, I don't regret standing up for what's right, but I'd be lying if I said it hasn't been exhausting. Change doesn't happen overnight, Marcus. It takes time, patience, and resilience. And yes, sometimes it feels like we're taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But we can't give up, not when so much is at stake." Marcus nodded, absorbing his father's words. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. Pushback from authorities. While the public debate raged on, the police department faced mounting pressure to address the incident involving Marcus. Initially, they issued a generic statement acknowledging the situation and promising to review their policies, a response that left many unsatisfied. Activists demanded concrete action, such as mandatory anti-bias training for officers and stricter accountability measures for misconduct. Colonel Thompson kept pushing for transparency, submitting detailed reports to the department and working with legal advisors to ensure his complaint was taken seriously. He also reached out to local leaders, urging them to hold the police accountable. Slowly but surely, progress began to emerge. The mayor announced plans to establish a civilian oversight board to monitor police conduct, and several officers volunteered to participate in workshops focused on de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. While these steps were far from perfect, they represented a start, a glimmer of hope that change was possible. Still, resistance remained strong. Some officers resented the reforms, viewing them as an attack on their profession. During a private meeting with Colonel Thompson, one senior officer expressed his frustration. "You're making us look bad," he said bluntly. "People will lose faith in us if they think we're always picking on innocent kids." Colonel Thompson met his gaze steadily. Faith isn't lost when mistakes are made. It's lost when those mistakes go unaddressed. If you truly care about earning the community's trust, then embrace these changes instead of fighting them. Finding strength in community. Tension simmered. Marcus discovered strength in unexpected places. At school, a few teachers went out of their way to support him, offering words of encouragement and checking in regularly to see how he was coping. One of them, Mr. Carter, even introduced Marcus to a mentorship program for young leaders. Through the program, Marcus connected with other teenagers who had faced similar challenges and learned how to channel their experiences into positive action. Outside of school, Marcus became more involved in community efforts. He attended meetings, organized by local advocacy groups, where he shared ideas for improving relations between residents and law enforcement. Together, they brainstormed initiatives like neighborhood patrols led by civilians and joint activities designed to foster mutual understanding. One project that stood out was a storytelling campaign called Our Voices Matter. Participants recorded videos sharing their personal experiences with discrimination or injustice, which were then shared online and at community events. Marcus decided to contribute, filming a heartfelt message about the importance of listening to marginalized voices. "To anyone watching this," he said in the video, "I want you to know that your story matters. Even if it feels like no one is listening, keep speaking up. Change starts with conversation, and conversations start with honesty." The video went viral, garnering thousands of views and sparking discussions across social media platforms. Messages of gratitude poured in from strangers around the world, thanking Marcus for his courage and inspiring others to share their own stories. A father and son's bond grows stronger. Through all the chaos, Marcus and Colonel Thompson grew closer than ever. They spent evenings discussing strategies for advocacy, reflecting on the day's events and simply enjoying each other's company. Whether it was playing chess at the kitchen table or watching movies late at night, these moments of normalcy reminded them of what truly mattered, their bond as a family. One weekend, Colonel Thompson suggested they take a break from everything and go fishing at a nearby lake. It had been years since they'd gone together, and Marcus eagerly agreed. As they cast their lines into the water, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in months. "You know," he said after a long pause, "this feels nice. Just being here, away from everything." Colonel Thompson smiled, adjusting, his hat against the sunlight. "Life doesn't stop for anyone, Marcus, but it's important to find moments like this to recharge, reflect, and remember why we're doing what we're doing." Marcus nodded, feeling a renewed sense of determination. No matter how difficult the road ahead might be, he knew he wasn't alone. Together, he and his father would continue fighting for justice, not just for themselves, but for everyone who deserved to live without fear. And with that thought, Marcus cast his line once more, ready to face whatever came next. Months passed since the incident that changed Marcus's life forever. The initial frenzy of media attention and public debate began to settle, replaced by quieter but more meaningful progress. While tensions still lingered in Maplewood, small signs of change started to emerge. Community members worked harder to bridge divides, and conversations about accountability and reform became less confrontational and more collaborative. For Marcus and his family, the journey wasn't over, but they had grown stronger together, finding purpose in their fight for justice. A new chapter begins. At school, Marcus noticed subtle shifts in how people treated him. Some classmates, who had previously kept their distance, now approached him with respect, inspired by his courage to speak out. Even teachers seemed to take a greater interest in fostering inclusivity within the classroom. One day, Mrs. Anderson announced a new project focused on understanding systemic inequality. She paired students together to research topics like racial profiling, economic disparities, and access to education. Marcus was assigned to work with Sarah, a quiet girl from his math class whom he barely knew. At first, they struggled to find common ground, unsure where to begin. But as they dug deeper into their research, Sarah opened up about her own experiences growing up in a low-income neighborhood. "Sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, people expect me to fail," she admitted softly. Her words struck a chord with Marcus. He realized that while their backgrounds were different, they shared a similar struggle, the feeling of being judged before anyone truly got to know them. By the end of the project, not only had they created a powerful presentation, but they'd also formed an unexpected friendship. Outside of school, Marcus continued participating in community initiatives. The Pauasquinto and the Our Voices Matter campaign gained momentum, inspiring others across the country to share their stories. Marcus became one of its most vocal advocates, traveling to nearby towns to speak at rallies and workshops. Each time he stood in front of an audience, he felt a little braver, a little surer of himself. One evening, after returning from a speaking engagement, Marcus found Colonel Thompson waiting for him in the living room. His father looked tired, but proud as he handed Marcus a folder filled with documents. "I thought you should see this," Colonel Thompson said, gesturing for Marcus to sit down. Inside the folder were letters from the police department detailing updates on their investigation into the officers' conduct during the incident. While none of the officers faced criminal charges, several were required to undergo additional training in cultural sensitivity and de-escalation techniques. The department also announced plans to implement body cameras for all officers, a measure long advocated by activists like Colonel Thompson. "It's not everything we wanted," Colonel Thompson admitted, "but it's a start." Marcus nodded, flipping through the pages silently. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, and that meant something. Building bridges. As the months went by, efforts to improve relations between residents and law enforcement intensified. One of the most impactful programs was a joint initiative called EQ Community Connect, which brought civilians and officers together for activities like volunteer cleanups, sports tournaments, and discussion panels. Colonel Thompson encouraged Marcus to participate, despite his initial reluctance. "You don't have to trust them right away," his father reassured him. "But sometimes breaking barriers starts with small steps, like sharing a meal or playing a game of basketball." Reluctantly, Marcus agreed to attend one of the events. To his surprise, he found himself bonding with a young officer named Officer Jenkins during a pickup game. Jenkins was approachable and easygoing, eager to learn about Marcus's perspective. "You know," Jenkins said during a break, wiping sweat from his forehead, "a lot of us are trying to do better. We're not blind to the problems. We just need help figuring out how to fix them." Marcus hesitated before responding. "It's hard to believe that when so many people feel targeted," he said honestly. "But if you're serious about making things better, then maybe we can work on it together." Their conversation marked the beginning of a tentative friendship, one that helped humanize both sides of the divide. Over time, Marcus realized that not all officers were the same. Just as he didn't want to be judged based on stereotypes, neither did many of the officers he met. Lessons learned. Through these experiences, Marcus grew wiser and more resilient. He learned that change was rarely straightforward. It came in fits and starts, requiring patience, persistence, and compromise. He also discovered the importance of empathy, realizing that listening to others' perspectives could open doors to understanding and healing. Colonel Thompson watched his son's transformation with pride. Gone was the shy teenager who doubted his ability to make a difference. In his place stood a confident young man, determined to use his voice for good. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Marcus turned to his father and said, "Dad, I used to think I couldn't do anything about stuff like this, but now I feel like maybe I can." Colonel Thompson smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "That's all I ever wanted, for you to believe in yourself." Change doesn't happen overnight, but every action counts. Whether it's standing up for what's right or helping someone else find their voice, you're making a difference. Marcus. Looking ahead, as graduation approached, Marcus began thinking about his future. Inspired by his father's leadership and his own advocacy work, he decided to pursue a career in law. "I want to create lasting change from within the system," he told his parents one night over dinner. Lisa beamed with pride, tears glistening in her eyes. "We'll support you every step of the way," she promised. Colonel Thompson nodded, adding, "And remember, Marcus, no matter where life takes you, never lose sight of who you are or why you started this journey. Justice isn't just a goal, it's a responsibility." With his family's unwavering support, Marcus applied to universities known for their strong pre-law programs. When acceptance letters began arriving, he celebrated each one as a milestone, not just for himself but for everyone who had believed in him along the way. A legacy of hope years later, as Marcus graduated from law school and embarked on his legal career, he often reflected on the lessons he'd learned during those tumultuous months in Maplewood. The road hadn't been easy, but it had shaped him into the person he was today, a passionate advocate for equality and justice. Colonel Thompson remained a guiding force in his life, continuing to champion reforms and mentor young leaders. Though retired from active duty, he dedicated his time to teaching leadership skills and promoting civic engagement. Together, father and son inspired countless others to stand up against injustice and strive for a better world. Maplewood, too, transformed over time. Thanks to the tireless efforts of its residents, the town became a model for community police collaboration. Programs like Community Connect spread to neighboring cities, proving that even the deepest divides could be bridged with effort and empathy. One summer evening, as Marcus returned home for a visit, he joined his parents on the porch. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the familiar streets of his childhood. "We've come a long way," Lisa remarked, sipping her tea. "Yes, we have," Colonel Thompson agreed, his gaze steady and proud. Marcus leaned back in his chair, smiling as a gentle breeze rustled the trees. "But there's still more to do," he said thoughtfully, "and I'm ready for it." Together they sat in comfortable silence, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For Marcus, his family, and their community, the journey toward justice was far from over, but they were stronger, braver, and more united than ever before.